Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of the Art Business Podcast. This week, my guest is Mikaela Milicuri, and her main subject of interest for us in the art business is she's an art advisor. If I think back, I don't think there's been an art advisor on this podcast. I've only been running it for about a year. But obviously, this is a subject which I think a lot of listeners will be very interested in knowing more about. Obviously, there are issues of confidentiality when it comes to speaking about clients, so we can't name any names. But I think Mikaela will have some quite interesting stories and anecdotes that she'll be able to put across to us anyway. So welcome, Mikaela.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and for inviting me.
No problem. And well, thank you for being a guest. Just a brief background, and I will post. I'll ask Mikaela to send me a brief bio and be posting that on the site. So Mikaela has been an art advisor since 2016. So she's got over 5 years experience under her belt, as it were. Academically, she studied for a master's degree in art history at the esteemed University College London Art History Department. And she's currently completing a PhD in art business and management at Royal Holloway at the University of London in their School of Business Management and in the Department of Marketing specifically. I think Mikaela's expecting to submit her dissertation later in the summer, so we look forward to that. So Mikaela, I'm going to just start in the normal way. Favorite city?
Yeah. Oh, my favorite city. Well, anyone who knows me knows that. So my favorite city is Venice. Venice in Italy. Yeah. Would you like to know why?
Well, I can't say I'm surprised. I mean, it's possibly a candidate for my favorite city for obvious reasons. But you tell me why it's yours.
Well, obviously, the obvious reason is it's so different to, well, all the other cities in the world, and at the same time it's such a big art hub, and I guess it's, this plays a big part of it. At the same time, I think I consider Venice, although I'm not Italian, I consider Venice to be my first art home. It was where I got my first internship, my first part-time job as well, and then I just keep returning back every year. I just make sure that I visit every year. I first worked at the Venice Biennale about 10 years ago, and that's what really, kind of created that spark in me and that passion for art.
Absolutely. And on top of all that, of course, it's the most beautiful, unusual city and setting. Just to give some more detail on what Mikaela's just said for the listeners, I think she's been very modest because her internship was at the Peggy Guggenheim Museum.
Yeah, I also had that. But yeah, my first art job was at the Venice Biennale, and I was an exhibition guide, and I was a pavilion assistant for the pavilion of Lithuania and Cyprus. That was 10 years ago, in I think the 55th edition of Biennale at the time.
Can you remember the name of the edition? They have names. I'm just trying to think back what that might be. Don't worry if you can't.
I honestly can't remember it, but they do have names.
I should know because I think we were going there about 10 years ago. We started with the MA Art Business at Sotheby's Institute of Art. We take people to Venice to every art biennale where we learn more about the kind of logistics and business from them. Obviously we go to the art, but that's our primary interest because of our program. And we then started going to the architectural biennale to make sure that that's every other year, and to make sure that students weren't missing out on Venice, because there's a lot of other things we do on an art business level in Venice as well. From me taking people around to look at altarpieces in the great churches by Renaissance artists where there are contracts, and we can talk about the business of artists, patrons, contracts, then to people obviously visiting the Pinot galleries of the Dogana and the Grassi, which you will know well, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's a very growing art hub. It's, as you said, the Peggy Guggenheim Museum that I am an alumni of, and then it's the Venice Biennale. The Venice Biennale, you've got art, and then you've got architecture. You also have the cinema one. Yes. you have got like the Buda Dogana and Palazzo Grassi. You also have the Fondazione Prada.
Yes.
There's so many different things and so many private museums and so many public events, art events that happen. And yeah, it's a great city to include in a master's program. Well done.
Yeah, well, it's good. The forgot what I was going to say now. Oh, what else was I going to say about that? Let's move on. So I guess in some ways the Venice, on time off, I often go across the Lido to swim, rent a cabin to swim and relax. And in some ways you could say and I think there's a nature reserve there as well. And in some ways you could say it's kind of quite a rustic, non-urban location. But do you have a favorite kind of rural, rustic location that you like to chill out in sometimes?
I really don't. I come from
You're a city girl.
Actually, I come from a country that's, well, I grew up next to the beach, not really next to the beach, but like in an island. And I spend my summers in the beach. So I can't have a favorite. Well,
Which island?
I'm from Cyprus
Yes, that's
originally.
what I
So,
thought. I was thinking of a
it's an
little
island.
not a huge island like Cyprus, of course. Yeah. I don't know if you have any. Are you into architecture? If so, or can you think of a building that you particularly love?
Oh, building.
That's put you on the spot. Sorry.
Actually, does. Yeah. I mean, I love the cathedral and the St. Paul's Cathedral. I like old buildings. I like, kind of very symmetrical architecture.
Yeah,
And
that's
I
cool.
guess that's one of the reasons they're classical. Yeah, that's one of the reasons I like London, is because it kind of combines, being a city person, a city girl, and also, kind of being around. Don't know, the architecture of Mayfair is just phenomenal for me. I just love walking around Mayfair, walking around all classical buildings in Marylebone. It's like lovely neighborhoods, and probably that's why I also like Central Europe that much.
I
Because
guess
of that.
the classicism, of course, which we got ultimately from ancient Greek buildings
Yeah.
via the Italian versions, the Roman versions, it kind of reminds you of home, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe. In a deeper and subconscious level, then yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Are you into music? I think most people on this podcast say I'm very eclectic in my musical taste. Are you one of those?
No, I am the opposite. There is many things that I don't like, but there is many things I do like. So I'm not sure which category I fall in. These days I'm just like, I am a very pop music person,
Right.
very mainstream.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if
Okay.
that's what you were expecting.
So you kind of like got your AirPods in and listening to, Spotify pop music. There are other music
Yeah,
platforms. Yeah,
yeah,
that sort of thing. Yeah.
yeah.
Probably
I
like
love hairstyles.
probably
That's
similar taste to my son then. So I get a lot of the pop music still from his taste, because he always insists on putting his music on in the car.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of it I really like. So coming to the obvious question, maybe you don't. I don't know if you've got a favorite work of art. I hate being asked that myself. If you do have something that you'd like to talk about, do. But otherwise, maybe what are your earliest memories of visual arts?
My earliest memories of visual arts. I mean, I actually do have a favorite art
Oh,
book.
right. Well, talk about
Can
talk about that first. Yeah.
I share this? Do you know the book called The Value of Art?
Sorry, say that.
It's the book called The Value of Art by
Oh,
Martin.
yes. Yeah, I've got it actually on my bookshelf here.
Yeah, it's not an old book. It's actually a really new book. I think it's relatively new comparing to the amount of books that out there about art. It's just so beautifully written, and the way that the sections have been split into, giving them Greek female names of like Greek mythology. I just find that so appealing, because probably how I think as well. Like I think in threes, I think in names. I need to give names to things. My PhD is very much structured, around these ideas. Obviously, I'm not stealing anyone's ideas, but I just like naming, theories and people, and I just love how how the author actually talks about the different aspects of value and how they all need to come together in order to call something valuable. And it's about art. I mean,
so it's kind of about can you remember the author's name? Because I think I've got a book called The Worth of Art. So pardon my ignorance. Can you remember the author's name?
Yeah, it's Mark Finchley. I
Mark
think that's
Finchley. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay, just for the listeners, really, in case they're interested.
Finley.
Mark Finley. So, and this is quite recently published.
I can very, very easily look it up if you want me to.
Yeah, well, it doesn't matter, but it sounds as though what he's talking about is both cultural and to a certain extent financial value, or is it only really about?
So it's the idea is that there's three values of art that kind of interconnect with each other, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the financial, the social, and kind of artistic. And they're just my view of the world is that these are the three driving forces of the world. So that's why it appeals to me. Like I feel that the world revolves around love, money, and power, social power. So people might disagree. There is the Freudians who might think that's also fear of death. That's a driving force. But I think that these are the driving forces. And I think that's why when you put this into the context of art and the value of art and how you understand the value of art, that's why it's so appealing. And it does it in such a way that's not, it just romanticizes the whole thing, giving it nice names, linking it back to female names, talking about it, separating it. I just feel like that's a really beautiful book, and you should have it in your bookshelf if you don't.
And I've been reading Katie Hessel's The History of Art Without Men, which is which is another area where not just not-for-profit galleries have been revising these particular, both old master women artists, but also emerging contemporary artists. People are now very interested in collecting in the art world. As we'll come on to that, because you will know all about that as an art advisor. But of course, there's a lot of academic art historians who don't think that money should be part of understanding art, and I think maybe that's where you and I might differ from them. I don't even see it as a bolt-on personally since I've been teaching art business. I think it's always been an integral part of the production and consumption of art from Greek antiquity, even earlier, I would argue, right to the present day.
I find this very interesting because, I mean, I think you mentioned already where I graduated art history, but it's very funny because I feel I was brainwashed during my master's into thinking that anything involving galleries, the market, auction houses, private collections should be kind of, it's crime, like it should be criminalized.
That's definitely the driving force, I think, of most academic art history departments. What I have noticed is these people in the early millennium, when I started as program director of art business, these people literally would treat me like dirt the moment I said I was at Sotheby's Institute. Now, we hosted the first TIAMSA conference of academic institutions that are studying the history of the art market. And they tend to study the history rather than tell their students how to become, like we are on my MA, telling them how to work in that world, that there are jobs outside of public galleries. So, I think it's changed quite a lot. And I think that we have a lot more to say to one another now. And I've also noticed that some of the commercial galleries that I've done work with are increasingly, there are other people being asked to write introductory essays who are from that public sector and agreeing to do it. And there was a time when they would not agree to do that. So I think things have changed a lot recently, which I think is great.
I think you're right. And I think, institutions like the Sotheby's Institute have really contributed in that change because you kind of put the art market and the art business in on the table as you put it on the map as something that's worth studying, researching, analyzing, talking about in the educational setting, which has always been very worthy of attention, but it wasn't as common, I guess, before these schools were established. So, well, obviously to yourself, well done, but also to everybody who kind of contributes to that.
And to hundreds, thousands of our alumni who've gone into that world. We spend an awful lot of time teaching ethics and law to make our students very, very aware of those ethical issues. So we are preparing them to try and make them into good people, and to turn the art world into a more ethical world. And obviously, because it involves often high finance, that is often seen as a bit of a losing battle. But I think generally speaking, we try to create although we have the Sotheby's brand name, we're not owned by Sotheby's. We see ourselves as an objective academic institution, and we do try to teach students to be very, very balanced. And a lot of our students go into the not-for-profit sector, fundraising, sustainability, increasingly, art journalism, which is often investigative and therefore highly ethical, and trying to pinpoint where there is corruption in the art world. We do our bit, I would say. Let's go back to that other question. How did you get into art? Do you have any early memories, like a kind of Freudian question?
Well, when I got into art when I was 5 years old, I just started painting and creating and making art, and like everything around arts and crafts, I just adored, and it was like my calling, it was my passion. So in my early years, all I wanted to do is become an artist, because I was just so in love with the idea of making more than the actual end product, more than the art itself. I just discovered the ideas of like aesthetics and beauty and taste, obviously without these kind of theoretical connotations that they have now in my head. But like at the time, it was just so amazing doing all these things. So I just decided I wanted to become an artist, and I just took all the steps to study art. So that's
And were you from an artistic family?
No, I've got people in my life, like my godmother and my dad, who know how to draw like architectural designs, and they were like really crafty. But it wasn't really that. I think how it started, and I probably just don't give enough credit. My auntie just one day decided that we should start taking art classes, because we're gonna like it. It was like no questions asked. You are gonna like it, and I did. I loved it, and I was doing it forever, ever since I remember myself being a child. I honestly don't remember me dreaming or sleeping. I remember me making art, and yeah, it was just
how interesting.
It was such a beautiful thing. I mean, I guess the reason
do you continue? Sorry, do you continue to make?
Don't. I consider myself a very creative person still to this day. Like I create things, but not an artist per se. I think.
No, I understand.
Yeah, I think why I stopped that is because well, it's not as sad as it might sound, but I just thought that I didn't have what it takes to be an artist, and I don't think what it takes to be an artist is talent. I honestly think that like artists need so much drive and determination that no injury or financial strain or competition can steer them off their path. At the time, I didn't have the courage to face that risk. It's such a hard thing to be an artist, and that's why I admire them so much.
Quite a few of our students actually come from studio art, fine art, in an interview when I ask them, are you going to carry on? They say, well, yeah, but, I've realized that I'm never going to make a living out of this. So the next best, I guess, is to do the MA in art business and sort of get involved in that art world and support artists whom they probably quite wrongly, I think, see as more talented. You know, I think people have opportunities and training and so on. So that brings us, I guess, onto the next thing about choice of educational subjects. What steered you in the direction of art, and maybe what you did your undergraduate degree in?
I'll tell you. So my undergraduate degree was fine arts. I did
Yes.
art. I started as an artist, but um, it's very funny because I always thought I loved making the art more than I liked looking at it. But then probably my first day at the undergrad, I had decided immediately that I'm going to go into our history masters because I loved everything about history, sociology, visual culture, all the theory behind why things are the way they are. I just I just found that so very attractive. And I just really wanted to know more. So yeah, then I chose to do the art history program because I did the art history program right after I interned for the Peggy Guggenheim Museum, and that was the first time in my entire life that I was introduced to the concept of collecting and collectors,
Mm,
which is funny because, well, it's a word that I probably overused today on a daily basis. I just didn't know anything about it. I was never
mhm,
exposed to it, where I come from. And Peggy Guggenheim was a collector,
mm,
and the museum is called Peggy Guggenheim Collection, not Peggy
mm.
Guggenheim Museum.
True.
And I just had to be, kind of introduced to that and learn about it. And, the idea that she used to own all these things and she used to
Mm,
buy these things.
mm.
And
And knew all the artists often intimately, as we all
yeah,
do.
exactly. Everything was just it was a new world for me. And I couldn't believe that I spent 3 years of my life in higher education and nobody ever told me something that was so common knowledge, basic knowledge, because I mean, I guess exactly because of that. Um, yeah, and I just fell in love with the market. I just fell in love with the idea that somebody can support artists. So I don't have to give up my dream of being an artist because people can support that. And the people can support that are the people who make up the market. And by then I just decided that there's so much more that I need to learn.
Mhm.
And therefore I just decided to kind of really explore into all the different roles that are within the industry, the art market industry. And yeah, where I started with my history, contemporary history classes, and kind of learning where things are today, why they got there, how they got made, and yeah, everything in between these steps.
So kind of moving from making art into then studying the art of other people and the art and the history of collecting, and obviously the background knowledge then therefore of art history plus your experience at the Peggy Guggenheim collection and understanding her as a collector, that must feed into your ability to be an art advisor. We'll come to that in a moment, but
Mhm.
um, do you want to just tell us about your PhD subject and how you chose it and how it's changed along the way?
Yeah, I love collectors. I love working with them. I was working with collectors before I started my PhD,
Mhm.
and there was something about the educational aspect that I just loved, and I just really wanted to know more about them. When you say collectors, when you put people into any group, you kind of generalize, and there were so many differences
Mm.
that I just really wanted to unpack. I just really wanted to understand, like, so are all of these people who are so different to each other collectors? Are there other names for them? And I just really want to contribute, in any way I could. And I feel like a PhD is a very long commitment, and anyone who's done one, anyone who's tried this journey, they know that it's a very long commitment, and at the end you kind of contribute either theoretically or practically towards something. And I just really wanted that. And at the beginning I wasn't really sure exactly how I wanted to do it, but I knew that I wanted to research into people, different roles within the industry. I was thinking about, the different players that there are, the different chords that there are, if there are any other kind of sort of things that I can unpack. And then for me, it was always all about collectors and collecting as an activity. And yeah, what it's about, it's I've spent the last 3 to 4 years really looking into collectors, researching about, there's also the theoretical parts of it that I'm just not going to bore you and your listeners, but
No, I think that would be interesting. The theoretical framework.
Perfect. I'm looking at it from I am following the journey of the object, if that makes sense.
Yes.
But after I'm not looking at it during its making, during the exhibition. It's actually when it's collected. So I look at collectors as somebody who explores the market, and they take different steps. And these 3 different steps that they have is, basically buying the art, and then owning the art, and then letting go. I think of that thing as of that theory as kind of a relationship. So the collector falls in love with the art, they start dating, and then they decide to get married. That's when the ownership happens, and then they either fall out of love, or their marriage ends because the collector passed away. And then I'm just looking at what happens to the art after that, just by following the object's journey and following the collector's journey, looking into the motivations, the intentions, because they're not always the same. Why you intended to buy in the first place, and why you wanted to, what you intend to do with it is not always the same. The habits of the collector, and yeah, just the theory behind that is just trying to understand how collectors construct the value of art. Goes back to my ideas of what the driving forces are for people to do the things they do, especially collectors, why they collect, why they own.
Would you, for example, use the theories of people like Pierre Bourdieu in terms of what the cultures of
value? The cultural capital is kind of the idea that you kind of incorporate into the value of art, seeing value from different perspectives. My theoretical framework is materiality, because I'm following the object. I'm trying to understand the materiality of the object and how this changes in different, when it's in a gallery or in an auction house or in an art studio, like a commodity, and it's for sale and somebody can buy it. But then that same art,
it's strange, isn't it? It's the same object, and you see it in different contexts, and it seems to change.
Yeah, it changes because there's also like its value changes as well. Whereas its value used to have a price tag attached to it, there's no longer for sale. It still has a kind of monetary value, which is, either the insurance you pay with it, or how much you spend, if that's important to you as a collector, how much it's appraised for right now, how much you're going to spend and you're going to make of it. The social value is also there. There is kind of the show-off aspect, or kind of gathering people so they can see the new home of the art, and that might lead to kind of supporting the artist if more people would like to own that as well. There's so many different aspects of the object, and then by selling it again, you repurpose it and you remake it into a commodity, so you could give this identity back to it. And I just find that so attractive, because, as you say, it's exactly the same object. When did that change happen? Like, who's responsible?
So that some listeners might be quite surprised by the first thing you said was about the analogy of a relationship, a human relationship of love, and ending sometimes in divorce or letting go of something. Maybe they die. It can be very sad. So it's all very quite emotional, that emotional presence in art. And I'm just thinking that one of the classic books that influenced my interest in collecting academically was Jas Elsner's The Cultures of Collecting, which I'm sure you know. There's an essay in there by Baudrillard sort of French philosophical kind of writer, and he talks exactly about that. He talks about the object the collectors collect because of a passion, and of course, passion is still a word we even use in when we're looking at the art market. And even at investment, we talk about investments of passion. High net worth individuals and ultra high net worth individuals. I've just been doing a report actually, which is a little bit confidential at the moment. It's going to be launched next week, but it's part of a report of several authors about what's happened to the art market recently. And increasingly, I find when I look at wealth reports that people, millennials, younger generations, are beginning to say they want to buy luxury objects and fine art in particular, more so than other luxury objects, because they're passionate about them. And I think there's been a bit of a sea change there to a certain extent. Or has there? I think there's been so much about people investing in art simply for its financial value. I think what is coming across is that millennials are wanting to go back to, I actually care about what I'm buying. I want a relationship with it, if you like.
Yeah, I think it's because there's, the audience change as well in the artist demographic. There's so much, so many younger artists actually now having their moment, and
artists of color.
Yeah, and they're doing so well, and I think that's exactly why, like, you really do want to be part of that. If the people who are involved in you want to be involved in the market, if the people involved in the industry are your age, and also I think it's a very bad idea to just do it for investment, because even like people who are very serious collectors, extremely successful in their collection, they very rarely do it for the money, because they know that this is not going to make you a collector. Like, you actually need to own the work, not just to buy and sell it.
Yes.
In order to be a collector, you have to have this middle kind of this period in the middle that it's you living with the object. And about the first thing you said about loving the object and the analogy of like a romantic relationship, I had this discussion recently with somebody who asked me, as an art advisor, is that how you see it? Well, yeah, if I've talked to so many collectors, and they all say, or most of them say, I love art, or I fell in love with it, or if you love it, then that's exactly it. It's a romantic love.
That surprises people as well. When great contemporary art collectors are interviewed, people like obviously Charles Saatchi. I'm thinking of Patricia Sandretto, working in Italy in her foundation in Torino. We always take our students to her foundation. She always talks to us, and it's all about, I came to London from Italy as a student in the late 80s, early 90s, and I'm lucky to come from a wealthy background, but I love art. We're art collectors, and luckily there were these people that later became labeled as the YBAs, the Young British Artists, and I was collecting early Damien Hirst. But most importantly for her was that she was collecting the women artists. She felt that they were underrepresented, and at a very early stage. But she like Saatchi, like Pinault, they say, I only ever buy what I love, which is why I very rarely buy at auction, they will say. So I want to also be quite philanthropic. I see myself as supporting emerging artists, such as what people like Hirst and Rachel White-Reeves and so on used to be. And I think it always surprises people that these big names like Saatchi and so on, that they almost see as like villains in the media. They're wealthy people who have too much money, and it quite surprises people that how passionate these people are about the art that they collect.
They collect, yeah, that's true, very true.
Yeah, and if they tend to say that I'm not really in this for the money, but if the work goes up in value, that's a bonus. But a lot of the works I'm collecting go down in value, so it's almost like a hedge portfolio in financial terms, that I know that a lot of the contemporary artists that I buy, I probably will never be able to resell, so the financial value, at least temporarily, will become zero. But we have to watch that, obviously, because your understanding of the history of art will know that some artists who were never bought in their lifetime, thinking Vincent, end up selling for millions. So we can never be certain. We're not the people who decide what has that financial value in the future. We know about it now, but we never know what's going to happen in the future. I think that's another fascinating thing about art as an investment asset, because obviously when you're looking at gold and oil and other hard assets like that, they're very different from art, because art is unique. It's a hedonic asset, it's a pleasure asset. So it is very, very different, I think. We'll obviously continue to talk about that, but I was just going to ask, I think people would be interested in, when did you first have the idea of becoming an art advisor? How did that, can you remember how that actually happened? Did you think that you wanted to be an art advisor, or did it just develop organically?
I think somebody suggested it to me. I used to work for commercial galleries, and I did that for a long time. But then I just, for many reasons, that there is many things there. Obviously, I got a dealer and an advisor. They're both intermediaries, but there's many differences between the two. And for all these differences, I just felt that was not for me. It wasn't really aligning with what I wanted to do in my ethics and my preference, let's say. So somebody suggested, one of my collectors suggested it. And it just made so much sense at the time. It was like addressing the elephant in the room. It was like, oh yeah, you're right. Like that's what I should do. I was always so fascinated by the idea of education, and there were so many collectors who they aren't shy to ask for advice. It's not that they don't want to. They really want to. They just don't know who to ask and where to find these people. And I just feel that advisors are these people. So I just really wanted to contribute from an educational, pedagogic perspective.
I think people can feel a little bit ashamed that, I've got money, I've got disposable income, and I love to buy art. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. And they're supporting artists who really need the support. But they feel quite ashamed that they say, oh, I never had time. I'm so busy kind of working to make money that I don't have time to develop the knowledge. And therefore it's quite reasonable. And this goes back historically to Cicero and his art agent Atticus, where the ancient Roman, wealthy politician Cicero in the 1st century BCE, we have got his letters to Atticus, who's based in Athens. And Atticus is basically acting as his art advisor. And Cicero is quite unashamedly saying, you're the one, I rely on your good taste because I don't have the time for that. But I love art and I love what you buy me. And it's site specific. You put things into different villas, into different parts of my villas that speak to the location. And so it's there 2,000 years ago already, that relationship between the art advisor. And it's an intimate relationship, as it is, I think, with the artists as well. So as
I think it's a great relationship. It's a friendship almost. Obviously, there's the business aspect of it. You're a business partner, but at the same time, you're a friend for the collection.
Yes.
And I honestly think there is nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, if we were able to learn everything overnight, then we would. I mean, I would just build my Spotify platform and there would be no need for me to spend money on everything they spend money on. I mean, I will make my art. I will make my own, C. Twombly painting. I cannot do that. Like, if you've managed to, kind of commit time, and if you manage to learn something that other people haven't, then that's what you capitalize on. But that's capitalist society. It's normal. It's perfectly normal. I don't think anyone should ever be ashamed to ask for advice, consultancy, pretty much everything that you need and other people have. You don't need to develop, especially if it's hard to be developed, if it's our our historical knowledge.
Yes. So am I right in saying that you didn't ever work for an art advisory company, which are out there? And I know some of my students decide to cut their teeth by working for an art advisory company that has a lot of employees, each of whom is an art advisor, and they're given clients. Am I right in saying that you didn't follow that model, that you started just maybe with some people that you knew maybe from the galleries you'd worked in, which I think is quite a typical way of starting as as your own dealer sometimes, but you're as an art advisor. Is that the way that works? And then it grows through people then recommending you, personal recommendations.
That's exactly how it happened. I never worked for an ad advisory, like a big firm, advisory firm. I looked into them obviously before I decided on like my, specific kind of list of services, what I can offer, what my specialization is, what I'm good at. I had to look into, other people, what they do, and I did that, but I didn't come from that background. Background was exactly as you said, was through networking, people who knew my work as, working for an art dealer and for a gallery. And then that was then word of mouth, kind of some marketing, and that was pretty much how it happens.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever write a business plan, or didn't you need to do? You did write a business. Was that kind of for yourself, or were you aiming to get some capital investment in what you were doing?
No, it was literally just for myself
Yeah,
and
so
to
you're sort of
keep me
you're
accountable.
self-funding from your other income. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it also kind of included kind of like,
Mm.
Company business goals, like, both in terms of like numbers as in clients, but also
Yeah.
the art that we'll be buying and the money that I can generate. So it's also kind of to keep me accountable and to make sure that I don't, forget why I started and where I'm leading with that.
Yeah, that's good. And what obviously you don't want to mention any names, but could you give the listeners some idea of your clients, if I can call them that, the collectors, in terms of demographics, like maybe kind of typical ages, gender, nationalities, national backgrounds? Is there a variety, or is there a kind of pattern in your clients?
No, my clients really vary, to be honest. I mean, I've um, had the blessing to work for a gallery that had a client list that was, all over the place. So even if I didn't get these people to be my clients, because obviously I wouldn't do that, but some people kind of recommended me. And then with all the other things that I was doing within the market, people would just like hear about this activity, this business, so they would just reach out. But there's nothing to combine them, like to kind of put them together, if that makes sense. I've got young collectors, and I've also got a bit more senior, a bit more older. I've got people from different parts of Europe, but also, outside Europe. But in terms of like who I'm kind of targeting right now, I really try to kind of focus more on younger collectors, 30s, early 40s, because I
So
really
like
think
millennial generation. Yeah.
yeah, I really
And
think
do
that
they, may I ask, do they tend to be what we might call HNWIs, high net worth individuals, i.e., with disposable income of $1 million plus? I think that's usually defined as at the moment, or isn't, or don't you really know?
I mean, you mean
Yeah,
millennial
the
collectors in
people
general,
that
my clients?
your clients. Do you know anything about their financial
Yeah,
backgrounds?
the people that I advise are probably in that category.
Probably HNWIs.
Um, yeah.
I mean, it's nothing surprising about that. I'd expect
No,
that.
yeah, no, but it doesn't mean that this is how collectors collect. Like,
No.
you can
Oh
have
no.
collectors who start very modest numbers, and they can build their net worth doing what they're doing as collectors.
Yes. Yeah.
It's not about the investment of it. It's
Yes.
that you don't have to resell it to make the money. You can just
Hmm.
own it, and then the
Hmm.
art can increase in value based on different factors. You
Hmm.
can build your net worth doing that.
Yeah.
And there is many people who just don't want to spend that much, either because they can't afford it, they just don't want it. They're
Mm.
new to that and they're not sure.
Yeah.
Um, it's not that I specifically will target ultra high net worth individuals. The ideal client is, has nothing to do with how much money they have to dispose or to
Hmm.
spend. The ideal client, for me at least, is somebody who's open to education. I mean, they want to learn. They want you to, to take your advice. I myself, I'm a very critical mind, and I tend to question pretty much everything, which is something I assume that my students hate about me. When
I think it's very good.
Yeah.
That's what educate means, drawing out by getting students to question their values, etc. So there's no problem with that.
I actually think that by questioning everything you say, you end up making better use of the words you use and the thoughts you have, and understanding it better. And if it changes to what you thought it was, great, you've got a clear mind. If not, then great, you found why, like you backed it up in a great way, that now it's a lot stronger than it was before I actually did that interrogation to you, and I actually really like when collectors kind of allow me to do that. And like when collectors allow me to, I don't think of the knowledge I have about artists that it's an accumulated knowledge, based on market research, based on my studies, based on, the networking that I have and things I hear, and the place of being, art fairs, gallery shows, whatever. I don't think that this is kind of set in stone. I think that this is where you start. And then if you allow me to impart some of this knowledge, perfect. You're not going to learn it, because that's not the purpose of that. I'm not going to give an exam then, and ask you who exhibited where, who bought it, and how much that was, and when did that change. That's not the important part. The important part is like, do you like it? Are you going to keep it? Why do you like it if you like it? What do you think about it? And maybe just kind of some comparative evaluation based on the other things that you've learned. It's really important to like see as much as you can, read as much as you can, not necessarily learn them word by word, but understand them in your own way. And I think that's what collectors should do. And that's why I try to say no as much as I can to collectors who come with the idea that I have X amount of money, how can I make more? Or how can I spend it and make my house pretty? Because that's not my job. That's probably a consultancy thing. That's probably an interior designer's work, which is a beautiful thing to do. It's just not my thing.
You're looking at the kind of, you're looking at the philosophical collections between individual art objects as a collection, rather, as opposed to what they look like in the different rooms of a house, although that might overlap with that.
It can overlap. It's not like the curatorial part of it is part of advising. I don't rule that out, but it's not. It's you can curate the collection based on what's already there. That's one avenue. You can also curate the collection based on what is in the environment, what colors are in the room, what the furniture is, or where it's going. That's another part of curating. They're both equally important, and they're both part of like curating as an advisor. I'm not ruling them out. What I am ruling out are, is that category that, doesn't come with a budget, but says, let's spend this on something that's going to look nice, but I don't want to learn anything about this greater grand tree that is the art world. Because it is, and you're just like a little seed that contributed to that tree becoming bigger and bigger. You're just a tiny little leaf. If you don't want to acknowledge the tree, then you probably don't belong in the market. You're just a buyer.
How interesting.
That's how I see it.
So you see it as a kind of positive cultural growth that is contributing to that overall art world, which includes private collections, public collections, the historical objects, etc.
That's how I see it. And I think that to that mindset contributes the idea of private collections, because all the private collectors, well, the ones I work with, but also the ones that I've interviewed, the ones I've talked to during my internship, the ones I worked with in the past, when I was working for an art dealer, they do have this idea that things are temporary. Yes, I accumulate works now, but what's going to happen next? And there's many individuals who actually want to either donate the works or have the works in like private museums of their
Yes.
own, or just relinquish their words before it's not too late, just sell them all.
Yeah.
But there is this idea that, the work is going to be there with or without me. So I might as well just understand that I'm not an authority just because I'm a collector, just because I buy it and I add value to it and I get to see it. I am lucky. I'm not an authority. I'm not an agent.
And in a sense, the art will outlive me. I'm a guardian of that art and a temporary owner. We've seen quite recently, actually, in the art market during the pandemic in particular, I think we saw a lot of single owner collections coming up at auction. And I think those single owners are genuinely, and obviously the auction houses market it like this, but I think many of them are genuinely people who have a really good eye for art, or maybe combined with a good art advisor like yourself, but it's a kind of, they're very proud of their collection. But I remember the Durkheim collection selling in the early millennium. And the big point about that is that he was selling all these works he bought from German post-war artists when they were unknown, Baselitz and people like that, and Polka. And suddenly they'd become really well known and they were worth an awful lot of money. But the collector said, I'm going to sell all this and I'm going to start again with other unknown German artists. And I thought that was a great example of how a collector might be seen to be working commercially on investment value, but actually what they're doing is saying, right, I've had enough of this. This can now go into other people's collections. I'm going to start again with younger group of artists. I think Charles Saatchi did that to a certain extent once he got a bit overwhelmed by the YBAs and they were already out there. He then goes to Manhattan and tries to find some artists under 30 whom he can also support. And I think he did it in India and so on. So that is one aspect, I think, of the collector.
I think that's a matter of curating. It allows you to, kind of repurpose everything and start again, as you say. And I think that's why. I think it's Sigmund Freud who said that a collection to which there is nothing to be added to and nothing to be removed from. It's just dead. So there's no purpose to it.
Yeah.
I had a similar conversation just yesterday with a private collector friend of mine who we're just talking about, how private collections end up basically. And I have this idea. So Eli Broad, the amazing collector, one of the most serious collectors ever, one of the most important people to ever sit on boards of directors and trustees of museums, and then thinking about his art estate management, he created this. There was this creation of this amazing kind of private collection museum that is a great contribution to LA, but at the same time, it kind of outlives you. Your name is there. It's the name of your collection, but it becomes. And that's my opinion. It's obviously, I'm not quoting anyone. It kind of becomes a mausoleum, because you stop living, it stops living.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Which is, I think, why there's so many individual collectors going to the auction now, because they see what happens, how the succession of these private collections is never going to be the same. If you have people, if you're lucky enough to have people that you trust, that they're going to continue collecting, that's amazing, because the collection is going to have life, but it's never going to be your collection anymore. It's not going to be the things that you chose. It's not going to be the things that talk about your time. It's not the art of your time, and if you just leave it there to kind of commemorate the collector, it stops living. It's not a gallery, it's not a museum, it's not a collection. It's
interesting.
There is no, and I think there is an increasing number of collectors who consider their options. If that's start donating works, that might be a thing. The problem with that is that museums might not accept all these donations. It can be partly donations, it can be resales, and I think the easiest and fastest way is to go through an auction, because it's one sale. If the collection is big, you can do 2 or 3, and I think that's why that happens. which is very different to what used to happen. There is this book, Breakfast at Sotheby's, which I'm sure all of the listeners know, and it had listed, when I first read that, it listed like why people sell works, and it was the 3 Ds, and it was death, debt, and divorce, and then it was the 4th D added, which was dealing. And now it just feels like none of these 4 Ds appeal to any of the collectors. They just have the works and they just don't know. The reason why they sell them is not because they're dealing. It's not because they've died and somebody died and they ended up with it. It's just because they know that the art needs to outlive them. It's going to outlive them, whether they like it or not. And it just needs to get out there.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's another source for auction houses. Well, coming to sources, Mikaela, do you source works for your clients from lots of different sources? So art fair, do you source them from auctions sometimes, from art fairs, from galleries, from art colleges? I don't know if you want to talk about where you, and also at the same time, maybe you could talk about what kind of art, very briefly, obviously, but are you only looking at like contemporary post-war art, or are you sometimes advising people? Do you have clients who are interested in old masters, antiquities, cross-collecting, which is a big thing, obviously, at the moment? Could you talk about sources and types of art?
Yeah, sources is pretty much every marketplace that there is. The benefit of being an art advisor is that you have no agenda, you have no portfolio, so you owe no gallery, dealer, artist, anything. They owe you nothing, which is a great position to be in. So basically how I source the works is, it can be from artists' profiles online. You find them out. You can be from kind of art fairs, auctions. We've bought works at auctions on a number of occasions. I've also tried to, art fairs I avoid, but sometimes there's good art there and you can't turn a blind eye to it. You just have to get it from the art fair, then just try and see the inventory of the gallery. Galleries, obviously. I love galleries. I love going to galleries. You just learn so much, not just for the artists you want, but for all the other artists who they're trying to show you and present to you. And then the art that my collectors are contemporary art collectors.
Okay.
That I have had in the past advised on Impressionist artists,
Okay.
French Impressionism, which is funny because that collector also was involved with NFTs, which is very new thing.
Yeah.
So I mean,
that kind of reflects what the market is suggesting over recent years. It's impressionist, modern, post-war, contemporary. Do any of your clients, are they interested in like very ultra contemporary art, as we now call it, like very emerging contemporary artists, particularly the women artists and the artists of color, Black artists?
Not necessarily my collectors, but I know that it's very it happens, and I know that museums really want to be involved in that as well, because it's important to be as inclusive and diverse as possible.
Yeah. And what happened to you in the pandemic as an art advisor? Did life carry on? Did business carry on?
It did. Nothing has changed really, because you don't have to physically be there. And the good thing is that if you want to see the art, then you just end up not buying art that you haven't seen before.
So you were looking at online viewing rooms at galleries during the pandemic with your clients?
I know that many people do that, but I really like to see the work because I know my clients won't. So my client will trust my eyes.
Yes.
I 100% want to see the work before a purchase takes place.
But did you therefore stop during the long lockdowns?
No. When I say the work, I just mean like probably the artist too. So if I know the artist and I've seen some works of the artist, then I know I can imagine how the work looks like, because I've seen other works of the artist, so I know how they work. But yeah, it hasn't really, no.
And maybe winding up now, I'm aware of the time. So do you have an interesting anecdote, some kind of story? I'm sure you've got lots of stories, and obviously it's confidential material, but do you have any interesting, particularly stories that stick in your mind about while you've been doing art advisory that are kind of...
The most interesting ones are the confidential ones. You're absolutely right. But yeah, I mean, I honestly can't share anything, but just very, very briefly, there's many things involving art law that people should be very worried about.
Yes.
You can find yourself in very tricky situations.
Okay.
If you are not 100% sure about what you're doing, what the people who work with you are doing, and if they know that what they're doing is, probably gonna create some problems. Yeah, I'm just gonna
Okay, no, I get hence I guess the reason why we teach quite a lot of art law.
Yeah.
They have an examination on art law, our students. It's the only examination we do, but hence the reason that we do that. So Mikaela Milicuri, thank you very much for being a guest on the Art Business Podcast today, and maybe we'll see you again in the future, and we're down the line a bit. Be interested to see how you're getting on at another date, but thank you very much for being the guest today.
Thank you for having me, David. That was very interesting.